and welcome back to another episode. This is a special to our podcast called the IceBergs Hockey Podcast. I'm Joey Rittenberg,
I'm Jared Rotenberg.
and we're so happy to have you back. This week's episode titled WTF Happened and Where Do We Go From Here? And by the jerseys, I think we all know where this conversation is going.
It's been a mess in Leafs land. It has been a mess after another Game 7 loss to the Boston Bruins. Obviously, Joey will preview it. We'll get into everything that happened from the playoffs and even the mess that has come after the playoffs. So I'll let Joey get back into that intro, but we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, and usually we're not going to be doing 2 episodes a week, but we kind of just felt it was necessary. Locker room clean out day was the other day. Today has been the shitstorm after the Sheldon Keefe firing, with Shanahan and Tree Living commenting on the firing, the playoff upset, just sort of the disgrace of the organization at the moment, and just sort of the after effects of this loss that a lot of people, I think, thought this team had in the bag. Maybe not necessarily going into it just because of previous sort of narratives and whatnot. But the first thing, and this was a huge one, before we get into the gameplay, we're going to just talk about the series as a whole. We wanted to talk about the Boston narrative. So we go back to 2013. We were both 10 years old. I was actually 9 because I have a late birthday. I actually was forced to go to bed when the game was 4-1 and woke up to the next morning to the most bitter news of my life. 2018, Game 7, loss. 2019, Game 7, loss. And we arrive back in 2024 with what? Yet another Game 7 loss, a repeat 11 years after the OT winner scored in Boston. Was it by Bergeron? Who scored that?
Bergeron potted that OT winner.
And Pasta, sadly, the new younger generation of Boston's talent, crushed my dreams on, I think it was Saturday evening.
Terrible.
It's just, there's a lot to say, but there's honestly
There's nothing to say because for all analytics going into the series, like you mentioned that going into this series, the Leafs were somewhat doubted because of the history, and the Leafs haven't beaten the Boston Bruins in the playoffs since 1959. You've heard the stats, you've seen the stats, all of that. But the whole point is, I honestly didn't make much of the curse heading into this series because the Toronto Maple Leafs haven't played the Boston Bruins in a playoff series since 2019. Since before COVID, the Leafs are completely different, but more important, the Bruins are completely different, not just since the team they had in 2019. The Bruins are completely different from the team they had last year in 2023. They've lost Bergeron. They've lost David Krejci. They're significantly a less deep team than what they've had in the past. And in my opinion, I didn't even have this going to 7. I thought the Leafs should have been able to, skill-wise, win this series in 6. I think the Leafs are a deeper team. The Bruins are better defensively and better in net. But the point being, in net, goaltending is kind of a crapshoot. So in the playoffs, anything can happen. So I didn't make much of, the Swayman versus Samsonov thing. Samsonov was playing well heading into the playoffs. I actually, as much as I knew if we were going to go on a run, Joseph Woll was eventually going to have to be the guy.
Yeah.
I agreed that based on Joseph Woll having a rocky end to the season and Samsonov having a good end to the season, starting Samsonov game 1 made sense. But having the Leafs goaltenders versus the Bruins goaltenders, yes, obviously Swayman was the real deal. He was an amazing goalie. We knew he was the best goalie heading into the series. But goaltending's unpredictable, and I believe that if the Leafs played the way that they played against the Tampa Bay Lightning in 2023, where they were able to get bodies in front of Vasilevsky and beat Vasilevsky, I thought if we did the same thing, we'd be able to win in that same fashion. And my issue isn't a lack of skill. My issue is a lack of execution. We found a way to beat a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning in the 2023 NHL playoffs. And it's almost like we recognized the way that worked. And we're like, yeah, let's try it a different way. We totally changed our playing style. We could not get in close. We continued cycling around from the perimeter, did not get bodies in front of Swayman. did not crash the net or get bodies in front of the net until John Tavares did so in that Game 5 overtime winner. But at that point, it was a little too late. This Leafs team did not lose the series because they're a worse team than the Boston Bruins. And that is why it's unfortunate. Because if they were outclassed and just beaten flatly by the Bruins, then I wouldn't say things like we should have won the series. I would say, you know what? The Leafs team needs to get better. Brad Treliving has work to do to improve the roster and improve certain areas. And I'm not saying he doesn't have room to do those things, because this team isn't perfect. It isn't flawless, but neither are the Bruins, and the Leafs lost anyway by their own doing. They weren't losing to the Boston Bruins. They were losing to themselves. And it actually feels like the same movie. That DVD player is stuck in that machine. It's the same movie we've seen time and time again. Going down 3-1 in the series in 2013 and 2018, crawling back to bring it to 7, and then losing it anyways. I mean, it's frustrating. It's disgraceful. And unfortunately, at some point, you have too many bullets in your chamber. Brendan Shanahan has already fired Mike Babcock. He's already fired Kyle Dubas. And now he's fired Sheldon Keefe. And at some point, that bullet is his own. He needs to wear that, and he probably, I mean, it sucks to say that anyone has to lose their job, but that's the business. And at some point, it needs to be a change from the top. It needs to be a presidential change. I'm not saying the entire core is gone. I'm not saying Matthews or Nylander are gone. But changes need to happen. And with that said, let's get into this entire series as a whole, because as you could tell, I'm frustrated. I know Joey is frustrated. Let's just dive into this.
So, I mean, the way I put it in my notes over here, and like the way I see it, is the special teams just left the chat. They were like, where were they?
Non-existent.
It's just
they weren't existent.
And to tell you the truth, I went to Game 3. Like it was, the atmosphere was dead. First of all, Leafs Nation, I am so thoroughly disappointed with you. And I'm disappointed with myself. Like it's disappointing because I just feel like we wanted it, but we didn't want it enough. And obviously what we're going to talk about today is the actual playing. But it was not the same energy that we had last year. Like
I'll say to that is I agree with you with the first few, like obviously our first games at home,
yes,
Game 3 and Game 4. That was a problem. It really was quiet. But I would argue, as someone who went to Maple Leaf Square a few times, and obviously as someone who was tuning into every single game on TV, you could tell that as the Leafs were dragging themselves back into the series, the fans were being dragged back into the series. And yes, it sucks that it took us, actually starting to play well for the fans to get into it, because there are teams that doesn't matter how they're playing, the building is always rocking. But the Leafs aren't like that. We are a nervous fan base, and to be honest, the Leafs fans can't be blamed for that. The Leafs are purely to blame for why these Leafs fans are shaken every time come playoff time. We're not always excited.
I think we didn't come in with the same gusto that we usually do, and it kind of felt like a lull in the beginning. I agree with you. It built over time, 100%. I agree.
But again, what I'll say to that is we didn't have home ice advantage. So we didn't have our first games at home until Game 3 of the series. If the Leafs were to go out in Boston and dominate, but not just dominate. You could split the series. We were 1-1 heading into Game 3. That's fine. But if the Leafs were to have played in a game that actually inspired more hope, where they were doing the things that allowed them to beat Tampa last year by getting bodies in front of the net, I feel like the Leafs were kind of promised so much more physicality this year. We were promised so much more than we've ever seen. And yes, our hit metrics were up majorly compared to last year. But if you watch the games, this Leafs team did not feel like the physical juggernaut that we were almost promised. And I feel like that is to blame for why these Leafs fans didn't come into that first game in Toronto with that gusto. If we were to have come in and rocked the Bruins a few times, and even if not won both games, even if we split the series, if we were to have genuinely given them a run for our money by
absolutely
scoring those big goals and actually dominating them offensively, having a big game from some players, believe me, we would have entered Game 3 feeling a lot better about ourselves. But unfortunately, our Leafs fans to be to blame for why we have so much emotional trauma about playing the Boston Bruins. Like, it's the Leafs' fault. The Leafs play this manner, and then they wonder why it is that the fans kind of aren't equaling them on that on the being riled up and being rowdy.
So to touch on the special teams comment, yeah, it wasn't there, and it wasn't, to be honest with you, it wasn't there all season, which is
Yep.
really, or not like all season, but I would say,
Second half of
yeah,
the year was bad. Like
second
heading
half of
into
the
the
year was
playoffs, it was bad.
after the All-Star break, it got a little rough. I think
Absolutely.
Marner was injured at some point, and then there was just
There
Riley
were
was
injuries, but
out.
it was more a system related thing. Like this is the thing with the Leafs. It's not for a lack of skill. It's a lack of like, okay, you know what works, especially when a goalie like Swayman is as dialed in as he is. Get
Oh
bodies
my
in
God,
front of the
yeah.
net and shoot from a distance. Like that's how you beat a goalie. Sure enough, the Panthers did it in this second round series, and it allowed them to score some big goals on Swayman and finally make him look human. He's a really good goalie, but he's beatable, and that's why like I totally like the special teams are a major part of the reason the Leafs lost. But I would say it's also the entire part of the way we played offensively. Doesn't matter 5-on-5 or on the special teams, just period point blank. The way we played offensively in terms of not getting bodies in front of the net, in terms of not crashing the net. We did a lot of circling around from the perimeter, and that's something that lasted on 5-on-5 and on the special teams. And that to me is why we couldn't find a way to make our special teams more.
For sure. And I think too, like you look at their PK and their power play, like they they weren't scoring. It's you have a man advantage and you can't even friggin' get a body in front of the net. Like it's ridiculous.
If
It's
anything, it was a motivation killer. Like it was game six. Obviously, we ended up winning game six. But if we were to lose that game, the pure reason would be we had that 4 minute power play. And not only did we not generate a goal off of it, we maybe had one shot, maybe.
it was I think I actually don't even know if they had a shot.
It, if it was a shot, it was something that like tipped off Swayman's pad from the side of the net. Like it definitely was not a good point A chance. Like it was we had opportunities, and that's why I say the Leafs more beat themselves than the Bruins beat them because it was the Leafs pishing away opportunities like that. Like that ended up being the issue.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think in addition to that too, when you would look at how much Boston would use their special teams to their advantage to like leverage, like not even leverage, but to gain control of the game and the puck and the speed and the skill. Like I think they were beating us in that sense. That I think ultimately was partly what led them to winning this series. I mean, we weren't there. I think there was a part of the mentality that just wasn't, we want to make the second round again. Damn, it felt great. And then if we do that, let's try and push it even further. I just, for me, watching and like seeing Marner crying, throwing his gloves on the bench, I don't want to be down on Marner. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later because he's been getting slaughtered in the media this week for sure. And I feel bad for the guy because he's a very talented player and I have good things to say about him. However, like there was like there was a whole temper tantrum happening on the bench when we were down in an important game. I think was that game 4?
It was game four. It was the one I was at Maple Leaf Square filming for Bar Down. And it was, we were looking at each other like, what is going on here?
And like
And
and Nylander is yelling and Matthews is rolling his eyes and Marner's throwing his gloves and looks like he's in tears and the coach is not like it just that atmosphere contributes. If you have that mentality, you are not winning a series. You are not winning a game. Like it that's the reality of hockey. Like
absolutely.
it's about skill and it's about having a mentality. And that was not a winner's mentality. And in fact, like I said, I don't want to tear him down, but like that was ridiculous. And I don't feel bad that the media was reposting that and being like, this is not what you do as a professional level player. You don't throw your gloves. Sure, you're frustrated. Fine, you break the rare stick. But like it was dragged out and sort of set the tone for the rest of the game. And they ended up losing that game. Like it wasn't a
And
good game.
the issue is it's not even like it's a one-off. It's not even like the first time. I believe it's the first time we've seen it in the playoffs. But earlier in the regular season, I believe it was this year when Marner stormed off the bench. Like I think he was benched for like a period or the end of the period or something, and he stormed off. Like you just can't have somebody who's doing that. And I'm actually we'll get into it in a bit. I'm more of a Marner defender than most. I actually think I would say even though the media isn't giving him credit for that because the Leafs ended up losing the series, I actually would argue he was one of the main guys that stepped up in game 5, 6, and 7 that even allowed the series.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He did get some good graces back with the media, and at least me, myself, and Joey, as members of TSN, as members of Bar Down, obviously we're the newest faces of Bar Down, and we're gonna, if we're speaking for the media, we will give him some flowers right now because he did step up his game. But when you play like that, and not only that, if your body language is like that as a professional athlete, you are not prone from criticism. You absolutely deserve to be knocked and criticized for portraying that body language as someone who wears a letter on this team. And even something else,
Absolutely.
I don't even know if it's something we were going to plan on talking about, but I'm wearing his jersey right now. At some point, I don't know if he's on the ice, but where is this guy to bring some order? Where's John Tavares to bring some order when stuff like that's happening? Like, that's a conversation we'll get into as well when we're talking about the offseason, kind of previewing what's going to happen. It's the time. You have to give the seat to Matthews. Tavares, he is a great player. I love John Tavares, and he leads by example. But at some point, we've had enough leading by example. It's about time someone actually leads. Not leading by this, leading by that. No, I want someone who steps up and gives that fire up speech. I see it all around the league, especially with the 8 teams that are still remaining. It's vocal leadership. I think it's so important to a team that ends up going on a Stanley Cup run. And it's almost like operating on some kind of collective hive, man. Like, you look at the way the Vancouver Canucks are playing right now, but even the way the Florida Panthers played last year, they were outmatched and outclassed in many different points on their Stanley Cup run. But they always had that collective mindset, and it all started from the captain, but it also all started from like the guys that wore the letters. It all started from the leaders, Matthew Tkachuk, for example. It was a collective body language of, we are not being beaten, we are not going to back down. And that is how you win in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And for some reason, it almost seemed like every single one of our players that wore a letter had a different mindset. It was all, well, we're not winning because of this not going right. We're not winning because this not going right. And it's like, okay, sure, things aren't going right, but part of your job as someone who has been assigned a letter, you're assigned a letter because you're supposed to be a leader on this team. You need to be the ones to pull the team out of that hole. And I just did not see it. I saw a lot more whiny finger pointing. And you expect to win a Stanley Cup with that. You expect to even win a round with that. Like, that's the issue. It was way more finger pointing from Leafs leadership than actually propping each other up and kind of sharing the mindset that we're still in this, we got this. And even though they dragged their way back to game 7, I always believed, but I don't blame people for saying, I don't think they're going to do it. And sure enough, the people that didn't believe ended up being proven right, because this team always had that little seed of doubt in the back of their mind. And no matter how much we made Boston start feeling anxious near the end of that series, at the end of the day, the Leafs did what a lot of people, rightfully so, expected them to do, which is what they always do, which is not step up in the moment.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's going to lead us right into our next point. And I think that uh, part of stepping up is also playing like you want to be there. And
Yep.
I've always said this about the Leafs, and it's so funny. You look at a Leaf game, a game in the regular season. You look at a Leaf game in the playoffs, and then you go and you flip channels and you look at another team. For some goddamn reason that I don't understand, they always look slower. They're a beat behind. Like even their opponent looks slower. Like I feel badly. Like I just feel like the games, it's like you've put it down like I don't know, 0.5 in speed. Like I just feel like it's the drive is there. Like I think it's there. And the family vibe that the team has, like I know they're close. Like that is very evident. The core has been together since they were 19 and 20, like drafted. But like you look around and it's like you're being beat to every puck. Every puck. And Boston's coming off a change and you're being beat to the puck. Like speed matters. And having the speed and grabbing onto the momentum when the pendulum swings your way. I just feel like Toronto often misses that grab. It sucks. It's so frustrating as a fan.
Really
I can't even imagine as a player or a coach.
It really is frustrating. And the thing that frustrates me the most is being a slower team is a problem against a team like Florida, because Florida will expose you. Florida is a fast team, and the Leafs just straight up do not match up against that well. But you look at a team like Boston, there is no reason skill-wise we should be playing slower than a team like Boston. Boston is not a fast team. If anything, I'd say
No.
Boston is a slow team. But the thing that they always have arms and legs above the Leafs is they outwork you. They will outwork you night and day. And it reminds me of like Tampa Bay, for example. When Tampa Bay won their Stanley Cups, they were never the fastest team. But what they always had is they would pump you down. They were so physical. They were so smart. So like there is a way to win a Stanley Cup by being a more slower,
You
methodical
need to
team.
balance it out though with
You
something
need to balance
else.
it out, and we see almost like the perfect comparison actually is what Tampa Bay was in 2020 and 2021 compared to what they are now. In 2020 and 2021, they were just as slow as they are right now, but they had more things that was able to balance it out. Their goaltending stepped up, but also their defensive core stepped up, and their forward stepped up, and they got timely goals. Meanwhile, in 2024, they played the Florida Panthers, I'd say the epitome of speedy and puck possession. And the Tampa Bay Lightning have lost all those things because that's just kind of the nature of the salary cap. Eventually, you lose your depth and you lose some edge. They've lost those things that made them a special team in 2020 and 2021. And now they're just slow. They're flat. And you see the difference. The Tampa Bay Lightning try to think through plays and they're methodical and they wait it out and they look around for options. We were saying this on a previous podcast episode where we were talking about what we think is going to happen moving forward in the playoffs. And obviously, we're talking about a Florida versus Boston series right now. Florida is the epitome of they almost move like a machine. They do not look like they need to process or think it. They process on the fly. And
Robotic almost.
it's robotic, but it's not robotic in the slow way. It's robotic in the way that it is literally automatic. I think automatic is the perfect word to
Yeah,
use.
there you
And
go.
the Leafs are suffering a lot more like the Tampa effect of what they have currently, but they don't have those special differences that Tampa did have in 2020 and 2021, where they at least were able to balance out not having the most speed with having certain other firepower all throughout their lineup and physicality and whatever. The Leafs don't have any of that. They're just slow. They're too slow.
Yeah, and that's what my dad. He's pretty down on them these days. I think when you're born in 1970 and you spend
3 years away.
almost, yeah, you spend your whole life wanting them to win and coming so close so many times. It sucks. But he's always said to me like the boys look flat, and like that was the best way to describe it. This series was a flat series from the Leafs. Sure, they rose to the occasion. They scored some goals where it was needed, where it was do or die, where they were down 3-1, down 3-2 in the series, and they were in sudden death. And they came back and won some of those games. And it's not to say they were flat the whole time, but that's just my opinion. We're gonna move forward, and this topic we'll just brush over because it kind of segues into what's been going on more recently. Um, Injuries were a big issue. Injuries played a huge role in contributing to the
They
Leafs'
did.
demise.
They absolutely did. We're going to get into the injuries, but when I hear people say that, and I'm not saying you, but I'm saying people on the internet, I often find it being used as an excuse. And based on playing style, it cannot be used as an excuse, but it is a factor. To say it's not a factor would be a flat out lie. So it absolutely is an important factor to the series.
I would probably say that I would put that as the second issue. The first
Yes,
issue I
yeah,
think was
I think that's fair. I think
was skill and playing. But I think and we were left like Leafs Nation was left in the dark like for a lot of it, which is valid. It's Toronto media. My dog is barking in the background. It's Toronto media. These things are bound to happen. Game one, we find out Nylander is no bueno and he doesn't pull up. And then game two or three, Matthews. No, it wasn't that. Was it game two?
game 4 is when the
Okay,
team
game four.
doctor pulled him.
Midway through the game, he
Midway
just
through the
dipped.
game, and then he was done until game 7.
And we just like didn't know why. We weren't told. Found out today, Brad Treliving announced in the press conference that Matthews had a head injury, which I wasn't expecting, if I'm being honest with you. I thought it was flu or exhaustion or something. I had no idea.
I wasn't expecting it until I started seeing the stuff going around Twitter of like people speculating, oh, this could have been the hit that did it. And there was one hit, it was early on in the series. I'm blanking on who the Bruins player that did it was. You know what? You know what? It wasn't a Bruins player. It was the end of the regular season. I think the game against Detroit. He was hit into the boards and he smacked his head. So like once I see things like that is when I kind of started thinking like there could be something to that. Because it did look and he looked shaken up. Like he hit his head into the boards and he wasn't the same player for the rest of that game. But again, it was a lot of speculation. It was, oh, it could be that play. It could be that play. But in that case, like if you have a head injury, why are you playing in the playoffs at all?
But for real though, like I think they get so wishy-washy, and then with social media and anybody getting that verification check mark, so much flew around, and it felt at times a little distracting. Like
Absolutely.
obviously when you're I hate this, pains me to say it, when you're 69 goal scorer and your Rocket Richard winning player is gone for playoff games, yeah, that's gonna suck. Yeah, people are gonna be talking about it on Twitter and Instagram. Like it's bound to happen. But
Especially in Toronto.
especially like it's a media pinnacle of hockey.
Yeah.
I don't think it was that major of a distraction, but I definitely think it was a little bit there.
It was a seed of doubt for a team that could not afford more seeds of doubt planted in their mind.
Yeah.
It was another thing to think about. Oh, woe is me. Nothing ever goes my way. And it's like, no, this team needs confidence. They can't have these things. So it was a distraction for them, but that's almost a reflection of the issue. It should, like, most teams would not be shaken by that. Obviously, losing your best player is crazy, but look at what Vancouver is doing without not their best player, but certainly their team MVP is their goaltender. And look what they're doing without Thatcher Demko right now. Plus, Casey DeSmith then got injured. Like, there are certain teams that rise to the occasion when everything's going against them. And the Leafs are not one of those teams. It's hockey. It's playoff hockey. You are not always going to have everything going your way. Shit goes wrong. That's a reality of playoff hockey. Injuries are part of the game. And that's why, listen, if you are someone out there that's saying, no, I'm not even looking at all that there was injuries, it's not a factor. No, you're blinding yourself to a real narrative. But if you are gonna allow yourself to give the Leafs another excuse, this is a team that's without excuses. The excuses have run
Absolutely.
thin. And that's why, again, when I started off and you were bringing up the injuries, I just wanted to preface that, and I wasn't saying you were doing anything because we've talked about this before. We were in agreement that that was not an excuse. But I was more speaking to the audience and speaking to people online who I feel like are finding every single excuse. And at some point, they're not babies anymore. They're not 20 anymore. They need to be held accountable because they're already 25, 26-year-old players that are entering their primes. And at some point, year by year by year, the window for them to win a Stanley Cup, drip, drip, drop, the window slams shut. And listen, with extending Austin Matthews and extending William Nylander, the window's been open somewhat, but the window to win with this core is shutting every single year. They're not babies. They're entering their prime. If not, they're already in their prime. There's no guarantee Austin Matthews will continue getting better year after year after year. He probably has 2 more years to get better. But by the time you're 27, 28, that's your peak. Then you start going downhill. So the fact that people are still finding a way to justify every single thing and give every single excuse, that's a problem for me because this team has their playing style to blame. And that is involving Keith, but it's also not fully Keith because as we're going to get into shortly when we're talking about was it the right move, was it not the right move, I have reason to believe I think Keith knew the problem all along, and we'll get there shortly. But Keith is not confused on what the problem is. The reason he's at fault is that he couldn't motivate them to fix a problem that he clearly did recognize, in my opinion.
100%. And with that being said, I was at the Bar Down TSN office yesterday. But yesterday morning, Thursday morning at around 10:30, 11 a.m., Sheldon Keefe, the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs, was fired. In my opinion, very necessary. His head was he had been on the chopping block for a while. They were just waiting for the last shoe to fall. And the that game seven was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like realistically, it was if he couldn't get us out of the first round, it was evident that he was probably going to be fired. That being said, like he as a coach, he went, I think, 220 something. Like to
He's the winningest coach
91.
in Leafs history. He's the
Like
winningest coach in Leafs history.
he's done tremendously well. However, I think and we'll sort of segue into media day today because I think that there's a lot to be said about
Should
the
we
top down.
before we do? Should we get into a little bit more about Game 7, or just like the point's already clear about they did
We can talk about game seven. Unfortunately, I was in New York traveling. I don't know if I told you this,
okay.
and I was in a musical for the first two periods. So I didn't get to turn it on. Nothing happened. Thank God it was 0-0. God forbid if they score a goal in the first two periods. But
Crazy.
it's crazy. But I turned it on and boom, there we go. Nylander pots a goal. Oh, nope. Just kidding.
90 seconds
Boston's
later.
like it's so Leafs. It's so Leafs to
It
do
is.
that. Like I was like, are you kidding me? Like for a second, like I actually was like, okay, like we're like this game is like we're gonna win it. Like it's actually going to happen. Like I actually had that hope. I mean, obviously my trauma and PTSD from the past 10 years still lingered. But I remember I was walking through Times Square and I had the game open on my phone. I was using Stream East because I couldn't use like my TSN streaming. Like I couldn't use it in um the States, and I had it open and I knew I was behind, and I started feeling my phone buzz when I was in overtime, but I had like I wasn't seeing the notifications pop up. And I was like, oh my God, mom, like I think something's gonna happen or whatever. And I was watching, I was like, okay, like this isn't an awful start to overtime. I don't know how long into it was
It
it.
was like 2 minutes in. It
Okay,
was
so
it
I
was
remember
too early. It was bad.
I was like, maybe it was like the 30, 45 minute mark. I was like, okay, like, sure, yeah, cool. They haven't scored yet, thank God. And I let out the biggest yell. I think someone thought like I was really hurt or something, but everyone was staring at me because I was just in Times Square on my phone. And it wasn't a Rangers game on. Like, it wasn't like there was anything going on for them. They were sitting pretty already waiting for whoever was going to lose for their next matchup. Like, truly it was devastating. I'm devastated about it. My dad is currently he just climbed to Mount base camp of Mount Everest, and we like one of the things we've bonded over the years is our love for sports and our love for the Leafs. So I had to break the news to him over WhatsApp because his text messages don't work. But that like I cried. Like I actually did cry. Like there were tears. Every year though. I have videos from every year. Anyways, Jared, you can talk about what happened with you.
Let me I'll get into game 7 and I'll explain what you saw in the first two periods, which to be honest wasn't much, but it also honestly makes me more frustrated because they didn't play badly in period. Well, they actually didn't play well in period 1, but period 2, I would say the Leafs dominated. And then the fact that we couldn't find a way to bury on our opportunities because of the same
Absolutely.
offensive issues that I talked about earlier. That's the thing that frustrates me because the Leafs, I feel like they got up to like, in order to properly talk about game 7, we have to obviously talk about Ilya Samsonov was in net. It was not Joseph Woll in the net. Joseph Woll is a big part in the reason why the Leafs were able to rally back and win game 5 and game 6. And as I previously mentioned, I agreed with the decision to make Ilya Samsonov the game 1 starter because he earned the game 1 start. But I've already said, and I've always said, and I even have the tweets to prove this, I have TikToks to prove this. I've always said if the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to go on a Stanley Cup run, at some point, Joseph Woll needs to be the guy. It's his patience, it's his calmness in the net that makes him a Stanley Cup caliber goaltender, in my opinion. I'm not saying he's going to win it in Vasilevsky fashion. I'm not saying he's going to win it as being the playoff MVP. But his patience, his calmness, it reminds me a lot of how Aiden Hill won it with the Vegas Golden Knights last year. So besides the point, Joseph Woll had an amazing game 5 and an amazing game 6.
I was
I
devastated when I found out he was out. Oh,
I'm like 99% certain. I don't think they've confirmed this, but I think it was that save he attempted to make at the end of game 6. The game was done. It was 2-0 Leafs. Boston Bruins with 0.1 seconds left put the puck in the back of the net. Joseph Woll tried to sprawl out to make the save, and he looked invisible on comfort. and Steve Dangle, I'm a big Steve Dangle podcast guy, and they were mentioning how there's a video of the belt, like when Matthew Nyes gave the belt to Joseph Wall, and Joseph Wall's demeanor when he's lifting that belt. Initially, it looks like he's cold. He's like, "We're gonna go out and win it in Boston." But watching it back with what we know now, his coldness, his demeanor, it doesn't look like someone that was like cold. We're gonna win it. It looked like someone wincing in pain. It looked like someone that was already starting to doubt in the back of his mind whether or not he was going to be good to even play Game 7. And that's such a terrifying reality. Now, with that out of the way, Ilya Samsonov gets in the net, and I'd love to be able to say that he was the issue in Game 7, but he actually wasn't. He was a big problem at the start of this series, but he stepped up. Like, say what you want about the guy and how jumpy he is and whatever. He stepped up under pressure. He made the big saves under pressure. I'd say the Bruins started this game walloping the Leafs, which is a total, role reversal from what we had seen in Game 5 and 6. I came into Game 7 saying the Bruins were the way more nervous team based on the narrative of them blowing the 3-1 lead last year. But you know what? They actually came into Game 7 feeling determined. And there was a part of me, as someone who literally never doubted for a second, I was always believing the Leafs are going to find a way to win this series. And the Bruins made me nervous a little bit at the beginning, but Samsonov shut the door. Then as the game went on, I started to think to myself, holy shit, the Leafs are actually stepping up. They're still not testing the Bruins offensively. They're still doing so many things that I have a problem with offensively, but they're playing a really good defensive game. Their power play wasn't good, but their penalty kill actually waited until Game 7 to start looking really good. They had a really successful penalty kill, and I'm like, hold on. It's not a perfect game, but things are starting to go the Leafs' way. Then the third period. The Leafs are buzzing.
Nylander's goal was gross. It was disgusting.
Like, it was actually disgusting. And it's like, hold on, guys. The Leafs are cooking. The Leafs are actually cooking.
Let them cook.
They just
Let them
turned
cook.
defense to offense and actually potted a goal, all set up by Austin Matthews, who probably wasn't good to go, especially if it was a head injury. But nonetheless,
he probably was concussed or something. I don't want to speculate, but
if you have a concussion, chances are you're not just magically waking up between Game 6 and Game 7, a 2-day difference, and all of a sudden being fine. He probably wasn't 100%, but he set up a gross goal for Nylander. Then, as we were talking about, 90 seconds later, the Leafs have a balloon and pop it. That air just gets deflated out of I can't even say the air was deflated out of the entire building because it was in Boston. But all of Leafs fandom that was watching from home was deflated in that moment. Then we got into overtime. And 2 minutes into overtime, the Bruins were cooking. But I was holding out the hope that, you know what? The Bruins were cooking in the first minute of overtime in Game 5 as well. But if our goaltender is able to make the saves, we're able to turn defense into offense and go back the other way. And if we crash the net and do whatever, the Leafs could win this. Then Morgan Rielly is looking the wrong way. Then Mitch Marner is looking the wrong way. And then off the boards, off the stanchion, David Pastrnak comes in, and it was a disgusting goal. But he walks Ilya Samsonov, smacks it back in the back of the net. And that's the series. And as much as the Leafs played a really good last few games, I really liked the Leafs Game 5. Game 6 wasn't perfect offensively, but it was better. It was a fine game. It was good enough to win at least. In Game 7, I thought the Leafs actually at some points played like the better team. But when you play the way you played in Game 1, 2, 3, and 4, and when you do the things they did throughout the series, you allow yourself to get to a point where one goal is the difference maker and one mistake is the difference maker. And that mistake in overtime from everyone who was on that ice, that's the difference maker. And that was the series. It was a story of missed opportunities, mistakes, and a lack of capitalizing on chances. And that's why the Leafs are at home right now. That's why Sheldon Keefe is now without a job. That's why Brendan Shanahan might soon to be that other Jenga block to fall down from this tower. And
I think too,
all them to blame.
And before we hop into locker room cleanout day and the press day post Sheldon Keefe gone, there was just so this is a point, and we hadn't really discussed talking about this, but I just wanted to make it quickly. You look, and it sucks too, and I'm stuck on this, and maybe I'm one of the only fans of this. Just hear me
No,
out.
no, I'm let Joe cook. Let Joe cook.
Tyler Bozak leaves the Leafs. He goes to St. Louis and wins a cup. Phil Kessel leaves. What does he do?
He was like the best player in that series in that 2016 one.
Kadri, he leaves. What does he do? Goes to Colorado. Like Frederick Anderson goes to Carolina. Somehow, all of his mental demons that he fought in the years he would played for Toronto magically disappear. How is this possible? And I'm not saying it's dependent on having really good guys and blah 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 and people leave. It's so frustrating because it's like history is cyclical, and instead of being every 10 years or 20 years, it's every single year. And like it's relentless. And last year, I will say, probably one of the best moments of my life, and I'll remember it forever. I was at a Chuck's Roadhouse up north in Aurora for my friend's birthday. The place was packed and went ballistic. Like I was hugging strangers and I
I was in
cried.
downtown Toronto. Like it was it's one of the most insane nights of my life. Like at some point we got to just go through videos and photos and memories from that night because it was
Like genuinely.
unbelievable.
And the reason I bring up all those ex Leafs is it's like the pain that they were contributing to. Like they were able to go elsewhere, and it just sucks because it kind of feels like it's just a this team thing. And I know it's not. I know it's not. I know I believe in this team, but it sucks. Like it
It's
does.
the issue, and I feel like this isn't something you could quantify. There's no stats that you could quantify this, but hockey is so much more ideology based than people realize. The
It's mental.
Boston, it's mental, but like it's with the Bruins in particular. It's not even just that they're mentally strong. It's an actual like Boston ideology. They don't have skill. They don't have depth. Well, sorry, they have David Pastrnak, who's very skilled, but like throughout their lineup, I mean, they're not the most skilled team in the league. They're certainly not the deepest team in the league. They're physical, but they're not the most physical team in the league anymore. I'd say Florida's taken that mantle. But it's an ideology. It doesn't matter if they have Bingus on their first. It's what Pittsburgh was a few years ago. People used to always say it doesn't matter who they have because they have Mark Donkin, Buzz Flibbit, but they will always outplay you. It's something about being black and gold because Boston has inherited that and played in such like a Boston type way where it doesn't matter who they have from line 1 to line 4, from defensive pair 1 till defensive pair 3, and even in net, whether it's Allmark or Swayman or they had Rask before that, they always just play with an ideology. I don't care who you have on your lineup. We will beat you to a pulp. We are stronger than you. We are Boston. Rah, rah, rah. And it somehow ends up working. Like it's literally they roll off ideology and it gets the job done for them. And I don't get it. I don't get how the Leafs build
I
that ideology except for a replacement in the coach. And
I
that,
call
that
I call it the Gadden ideology. Their
it's
fans have
split.
it too. Their fans have it too. Like it's not even most teams have it. Toronto's fan base, and like we get smacked around and people are like, "Oh, your fans are fake. There's too many of you." Well, no shit. We're one of the oldest organizations. There's generations upon generations of people now that have been rooting for this team to do something, especially in what one of the longest droughts in sports history. Like that's
Literally.
ridiculous. Like that's a huge, as a player, as a coach, as a president, as a GM, that's a huge weight to carry on your back on top of performing well, let alone like winning a game, you know? So I think I agree with you. Boston comes in guns a blazing every year. I don't know how they do it. And their team gets older, and Chara guys like Chara leave and Bergeron leave and Krejci leave, and somehow they're able to keep the ball rolling. Those guys don't stay young forever, but they're still making playoffs. Like they won the cup in 2013. That was 11 years ago. They're
20,
still rolling.
2011 was their cup. They made the finals in 23. But regardless,
Oh,
the
they
point
made the
remains
finals.
the point remains the same.
Yes.
Even 2019, they went on a Stanley Cup run. They were a game away from winning the Stanley Cup. Like they didn't have the second best roster in that 2019 year because to win a Stanley Cup, I'm big on this point. I honestly didn't think that this episode was going to get us to this point, but since we're on it, this is a big thing that I have, and I've gotten in this fight with some of my friends at TMU all the time. People seem to argue that the team that wins the Stanley Cup is the quote unquote best team. And I completely, hopefully disagree with that. You could be a worse team and still find a way to win. Just like in this case, I think
Absolutely.
the Boston Bruins are not as good of a team as the Toronto Maple Leafs. But when you have the ideology and the will to win and that effort and the commitment from line one, I don't care if you're Brad Marchand or Justin Brazeau, you are all on one kind of hive mind in this one collective ideology that we are going to beat our opponent. And that's why, even though I'm picking Florida to beat them, but if Boston somehow pulls it off just purely for like the revenge factor alone, will I be so surprised? Not really. Boston plays in a manner where it doesn't matter who they have on their lineup. And like, why wouldn't they come off of the most embarrassing defeat in their franchise history to turning it around and going on some magical run? I'm not ruling it out. They play with an ideology that Toronto just doesn't have as of now. And that is why a change in leadership is so important. A change in coaching is so important. But in my opinion, probably a change in the president is important too, because it's all about turning a new leaf. This past core didn't get the job done. And somehow we got to find a way. Like somehow
Oh,
we got to change something. And I agree with what people you say, oh, just changing something doesn't automatically fix a problem. But we need to fix a problem. There are several problems with the mentality of this team. And that's what needs to be changed first and foremost. And that starts with a change in leadership, starts with slapping a C on Austin Matthews, and finally seeing if that gets the job done.
so we're gonna segue that into the firing of Sheldon Keefe. I mean, people were I mean, Leafs fans are relentless and ruthless online. We're pretty rude. Um, and
There's a
we're
big fan
pretty
base. Well, there will always
no,
be more percentage of assholes, I think, in a bigger fan base.
yeah. It's a we're not too like as you can tell, like I'm down on them right now. I'm upset. Like I'm never gonna be like, oh, like F the Leafs. Like that's no.
Yeah,
They're my team. I was born here. I'm not just gonna all of a sudden go root for I don't know, Minnesota. Like that's
I
just
don't get how
no.
people do that. Like, side note, I don't get how
Toronto
people.
is the only team in the entire NHL where you will go to a game, you will sit in the stands, and you will see people from Toronto by choice cheering for the other team. Like, sure, maybe like here and there's people that travel. No, there's like actually people in this city who just like didn't pick Toronto as their team. It's bizarre. It's because we haven't been good for a while, but or we haven't
That
been
that
able to.
totally that totally is what it is. Because I know a lot of people that are like not so much guys our age, but people that I guess were young enough to have grown up with knowing about. Like we were already 10 when 2013 happened, but I know like a couple of my buddies' little brothers are Bruins fans, and they're like, and it's disgraceful. And their parents are Leafs fans, and my friends are Leafs fans, and it's like their little brothers grew up seeing a household that's down on the Leafs, and they're like, okay, why would I put myself through that? I'm going to become a Bruins fan now, and it's like
Valid,
on the
honestly.
one hand, screw you, but on the other hand, kid kind of has a point. Like I didn't voluntarily put myself through this. I was born in this. I inherited this. Why would I voluntarily put myself through this?
so so anyways, so Sheldon Keefe, as I said, I was in the bar down office. News broke, mayhem kind of hit. We were trying to get out posts, and I personally thought he was a real mensch about the way that he said thank you to the team. He was
The video is really
like
nice.
real like truly like warmed my heart. It was a really nice video, and I think that's the way to go out, even if you go out with a shitty end to your story, like losing in a game 7 overtime for like the fourth time in 10 years.
The team that had your number all throughout this tour.
But anyways, yeah, I think that yeah, it sucks. Like changes to organizations are not fun. It means that things will need to be adjusted. It means that there's a lot of work to be done. It means that new playing style, new lines, new everything, like everything will be different. Nothing will be exactly the same as it was. If it was going to be the same, then we're never going to win a round again. But I thought his video was very menschy. I don't know if you want to say anything
I
more
I
about.
totally agree, and his video kind of nailed home the kind of guy he is, and he's the kind of guy that even though I've been on the fire keep train since the Leafs lost to Florida last year, I was big on keep
Me too.
keeping,
Me too.
you fire keep. That was always my mindset. And to be honest, a year later, I don't disagree. Like I haven't changed that mindset. I agree with firing Dubas with what he pulled in that press conference. Like I agree. If you're telling your boss, I don't know if I want to be here, well, the boss has no reason to keep you around. So I get that. But regardless, in terms of like the second we lost to Florida, I said keep Dubas, fire Keith, because I have a problem with certain things about him. But I've never had a problem with his actual personality. He's always been a really likable guy. He's always been a way more likable guy than Babcock. He's a nice guy. I think he did come in almost in an unfair situation where he had to be this teddy bear a little bit after Babcock, and that didn't really allow him to coach to the fullest of his abilities. And now it's almost the opposite switch where ever since Dubas left and Brad Treliving's come in, I feel like Treliving's almost told him like, okay, don't hold back, whatever. And he's kind of become this year a bit of a grump. But in general, I never saw him overall. Like I feel like he was kind of like, it's
his
almost like when,
his press conferences became questionable when he would
yeah,
dismiss the question or be like, "We're not talking about this." Like, okay,
it's almost like when you give a little kid permission to swear, it becomes every other word they do. It's like Brad Living's like, listen, don't cradle these guys. You could call them out when they deserve it. And he's like, wait, I'm allowed to call these guys out? Okay. F this guy, F that guy, F that guy, F that guy. I'm not answering any more questions. Like he kind of took that on a little bit this year, but I still really like Sheldon Keefe. And it's a point, you know what? I hinted at this earlier. Now I'm going to get into what I mean about I believe Sheldon Keefe deserved to be fired regardless of his amazing regular seasons. He's the winningest coach in Leafs history. I actually really liked some of the changes that he made when he came in. I definitely think he made this team go away from being a full-on offensive team. He helped inspire more defense, but he also helped inspire more shots from the blue line. There are things he brought in that I could credit him for being the reason for a certain amount of change. But what I'll say is part of the issue in the playoffs, especially against Montreal, we really saw it in the Amazon documentary in that 2021 year. There were problems all season long that year where the Leafs did the same bullcrap they do now. Didn't get enough shots on net, didn't crash the net, didn't score enough playoff style goals. And one thing I'll say is Keefe deserved to be fired because he couldn't get them to change those things. He wears that. He recognized the issue and couldn't get them to fix it. But I never once want to hear anyone claiming that Keefe didn't recognize the issue because that is just straight up untrue. He literally, in that 2021 year, the Leafs would be celebrating after having one of the best, like, in terms of win percentage. They had an insane regular season that year. Like, it was actually ridiculous. In the 56 games, they won an insane amount. They had a really good year. But Keefe never felt satisfied. You saw it in that Amazon documentary. He always said, I still don't like the way we're playing. I still don't think we're playing in a playoff style way. And the team would get pissy with him about it. The team would be like, what do you mean? We're on like a 10-game winning streak. What are you talking about? And he would still call them out and say things. And you have in that Amazon documentary where it was like Jason Spezza and Sheldon Keefe talking. And Jason Spezza kind of said to Keefe, yeah, you'd be correct that the team is mad at you right now. The team doesn't like you right now. But you know what? Keefe was right the entire freaking time. He knew the issue the entire time. He wears the fact that he never got them to change it. But I don't doubt that he will go to another organization. It looks like it might end up being New Jersey with some headlines that just came out. It looks like he would be the kind of guy that goes somewhere else and probably find success somewhere else because he's a nice guy. He's a likable guy, but he's also a hard ass when he's kind of given permission to be. And I think he's a good coach, but he wasn't the right coach for what we were doing because he couldn't find a way to get them over the edge. He did a lot of things that I think should have been able to go down as heroic moments. I will never forgive the Leafs for not making that Game 6 speech before overtime against Montreal a Hall of Fame moment. It was the "this is the time" speech. This is the time. Nothing to save it for. He called Hyman, Matthews, and Marner's line out for being dominated by Montreal. And we went out there and we dominated overtime. We outshot them 15-1. And then Jack Campbell lets in that goal. The Leafs lose Game 6. They go on to lose Game 7. There were so many things that Sheldon Keefe in the industry he's in deserves to fight the bullet for, but I can't actually say there's a lot of things that he's fully at fault. It's just unfortunately the industry part of it is you lose. It's a results-based business, and people kind of need to pay with their jobs sometimes. But Keith is not a bad coach, and he's not a bad guy. And I do genuinely, on behalf of myself and Joey, wish him the best because he is a really nice and likable guy who did a lot of good things with this team. And unfortunately, he will never get the credit for that.
We made it to a second round. That's huge.
But it isn't, though. It takes 16 wins to win a Stanley Cup, right? The Leafs got 5 games in, 5 wins in. If we tripled our win total from last year, we wouldn't have even gotten all the way there. We would have been 1 game short. Like, it's huge for the Leafs, and it's progress for the Leafs.
In the grand scheme of things, it's not huge, though. I agree.
Not even that it's not huge. In the grand scheme of things, you didn't even get halfway there. Like, it's nothing. And I don't know if that getting them through the first round is what saved his job, but I really hope that isn't it. I really hope it's because they actually saw a future here, and they didn't just give him an extension last year after beating Tampa just for winning that 1 extra game. Because at the end of the day, yes, as much as it's a mental difference, and I, myself and you, celebrated the absolute shit out of winning that series because it was a mental hurdle. At the end of the day, what difference does 3 wins mean when it's in comparison with 4 wins or 5 wins? It's a difference of 2 wins in 8 years. All we've done is progress from 3 wins to 5 wins, and that isn't enough to save anyone's job.
No, I agree. Okay, so we're gonna move on to today, which this is like hot off the press. Like we're getting this. This is like live in action.
It's sizzling on the IceBergs.
It's sizzling. Oh, ooh, I like that. Okay, so we're gonna start off by just discussing sorry, I just am reading this tweet. Game 3 tonight between Florida and Boston. Game 2 certainly had a nasty tone to it, amplified by the Pasternak-Tkachuk scrap. Both clubs have been told by the NHL this series will be heavily scrutinized moving forward.
Good. Honestly, we were talking about it earlier. Good. I can't stand the way they change up the way they call the series. Or just the way they call the game in the playoffs compared to the regular season. And I'm not saying call everything, but there are certain times where they actually like turn the rule book off. And this is another one. Again, I live for Steve Dangle podcast quotes. I think Adam Wilde, Jesse Blake, and Steve Dangle are absolute geniuses at this stuff. I think some of the bars they come up with, some of the lines they come up with are absolutely brilliant. I couldn't word it any better than this, so I'm using their line right now, and full credit to them. They made a comparison. What if the traffic laws worked one way from October until April? And then all of a sudden May hits and it's like, yeah, you're allowed to speed. You're allowed to do whatever. We don't call the rule book anymore. That would be absolute insanity, and people would end up getting in accidents and people would end up getting hurt. That is not how any rule book or, legally binding system should operate. You have rules. You stick by them. I don't care if it's Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals or Game 1 of the preseason. You have a rule book. You follow your rule book to a T. It shouldn't be a system where, well, some refs call it a little more lenient, some refs call it a little bit more harshly. No, there is a rule book, and you should be following that rule book as it is written. And I will always die on that hill.
Okay, so the first quote that we have coming in from Brendan Shanahan is, our results in the playoffs have not been good enough. That's on me. And Jared already kind of touched on this, but at some point, you have to bite the bullet as the president.
You have to bite the bullet.
It falls on you.
That's the issue. He's saying all the right things. It's his actions that are speaking volumes right now. Because he is admitting, I wear some of that. I own some of that. I've been part of assembling this team.
Absolutely.
It hasn't gotten over that. If he were to say everything he just said, I would be totally on board. The issue is he's going to say something like that, but he's going to get rid of another guy. He's going to get rid of the guys below him. He's going to fire Keith. And listen, it's still to be seen. Maybe he does step out of the role, or maybe even like Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment ownership comes in and says, you know what, Brendan Shanahan, we're making a change in the presidential position. That's not impossible to happen. But as of now, from what we've seen, it seems like he's saying all the right things to get almost like the good graces from Leafs Nation. but it doesn't sound like he's really taking much accountability if he isn't the one who's, voluntarily stepping away from his position. If he really sees himself as the problem and as part of the reason, and he's all about preaching accountability, at what point do you have to be the one that takes accountability? I kind of think it's now. I think the president should also be joining Sheldon Keefe in the same idea that I don't disagree with all the decisions that Brendan Shanahan's made. I actually think Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment loves Brendan Shanahan because from a business standpoint, he's amazing. Like, he really is a businessman, and he's thought through a lot of things that have helped this organization from a business standpoint. He's really repaired some relationships with former Leafs that have previously been soured on their organization. He's made an effort to bring these guys in and honor them and things like that. Like, he's been a good president from many standpoints. But at some point, if you don't win a championship, it's a results-based business. Winning a championship has to come above all of the other things, and he didn't get that done. He didn't get the job done. And at some point, it's unfortunate, but his job ends up having to come on the line for that.
Okay, so the next quote, and I can touch on this one as well. It's also from Brendan Shanahan, and mind you, this is a press conference with him and Brad Treliving, so we can get into some of Treliving's in a moment. But the first quote was, "Every player that has been here the entire time wants to win in Toronto, ... I don't question their dedication, ... I do question our ability as a group to get it done in those times."
Sorry, this came from Shanahan, right? Or Treliving?
Shanahan.
Sounds like a president giving a challenge to a GM, and I don't hate it in theory. The only issue I have with it is like it should not be Shanahan's position to tell Brad that, because Shanahan should probably have run out of bullets. If I'm not mistaken, Shanahan's been here since right before the 2014 Nylander draft. I believe it was after 2013 that Shanahan came in. If I could be totally wrong, I didn't fact check that, but I know he's been here for whatever it is. He's been here for the entirety of this Leafs core, from the moment Matthews has been drafted. And
yeah, April of 2014, Shanahan signed his contract.
Boom,
And
I remembered right.
You know something crazy?
What?
Allegedly, as of 5 hours ago, this was posted. He has one year remaining on his contract.
Just like Keefe has 2 extra years remaining on his contract. I know Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment does not like lighting money on fire and does not like burning money. You're Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. You're run by $1 billion organization. Both Bell and Rogers have a stake in the Maple Leafs. You have the money. You're able to pay for, unfortunately, lighting a few millions on fire if it means bringing your team a championship. And in my opinion,
don't disagree.
If they run it back with the same presidential core, yes, getting a new coach is important. It's really important, and it's a step in the right direction. But at some point, it's the president that needs to bite the bullet too. And if not anything else, the issue with Shanahan coming back is purely the fact that it preaches to the rest of the organization that there isn't as much accountability as Shanahan claims there is. Because Shanahan preaches, everyone needs to be accountable. But at some point, he needs to be accountable as well. Back to the thing, I actually don't disagree with what he was saying, though. I like the fact that he, like, in theory, if it wasn't Shanahan, but it was someone else in the organization saying that, I like the fact that they're challenging Brad Treliving because he's had 1 full year now. And he's made good moves, but he also made a lot of bad moves. He made the John Klingberg signing. He made a lot of bad moves, but also moves like Bertuzzi and Domi. Add to it. We need to be more physical. You saw, we brought in physicality, and our hits were way better than they've ever been. But we didn't play the same mean, nasty style that the Boston Bruins played, and it showed. That was a difference maker at the end of the day.
And it didn't. What happened in the regular season didn't carry over to the playoffs.
Because that's also, it's a coaching issue, but it's also like the way the team plays. So it comes down to coaching in the sense of like kind of preaching to the team, but at the end of the day, the team needs to do it as well. They absolutely changed their playing style between the regular season and the playoffs. Like, in the regular season, the Leafs were a team that moved the puck around a lot, but we also fired shots on net. And we also used our skill and were able to get in way closer than we were able to in the playoffs. In the playoffs, we kind of just circle around and circle around. Oh, is there a pass available? Nope, circle around. And at some point, Boston has flaws, but they are certainly a plucky team that's able to steal that puck from you. So at some point, a lot of times in this series, they would see the Leafs circling it around and circling around. At some point, they would go, oh, thank you, and go back the other way and get at least a good shot on net. And with the way Samsonov is playing a lot of this series, but even sometimes with Wall, when you give the Bruins a lot of golden opportunities, they're eventually going to strike on those.
Okay, the next quote comes from MLSC CEO Keith Pelly. He says, and this was one that Jared and I, we thought it was a good quote. The fans here not only deserve, but demand a championship. We're not here to sell jerseys. We're here to win.
It's a good quote. And sorry, that comes from the president of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment.
CEO.
That makes me think we could be closer to, because I didn't think about this when he first read it out to me. I just read the jerseys part. I liked the jerseys part. Now that I know who said that quote, that makes me think a Shanahan firing is not that far away. Because that's Shanahan's bosses saying, these fans are demanding a championship. And what does that mean? Accountability and change. So low-key, we might not be as far away from a Shanahan firing.
There might be another chaotic day at the office in the next few weeks. Who knows?
There might be. Regardless, I like the quote, and I like that that's coming from the very top. That isn't coming from a coach. That isn't even coming from someone on the hockey side. That is an overall president of the organization or a president of the business that owns the Maple Leafs. And yeah, I think that's totally the right thing to say, and it's absolutely true. This fan base will not settle for more first and second round exits. We're done. We celebrated that first round win.
I honestly, I agree with you. I think it's promising in the sense that there's accountability finally for the first time from what feels like the top of the top up, the top down. That's how change needs to come.
Absolutely.
Like and then the final quote, well, there's actually two. This one I thought was really good because I can't say enough positive hope I have in Joseph Wall moving forward. Like, I do truly think he's talent. People are down on him. I'm like, people are down on him. I'm like, you'd rather have Ilya Samsonov in net over Joseph Wall. I'd take Joseph Wall any day. Like
I'm seeing people say, oh, make a massive splash this offseason and go out and get UC Saros. I love UC Saros. I think he's amazing. But you have a goalie that's shown he's capable of taking you. Obviously, he hasn't taken this Leafs team on a run, but his playing style is the exact kind of playing style that you need out of a playoff goalie. And I think it would be a mistake to waste that and move Joseph Wall's position to backup role. Like, hypothetically, if you were doing a 1A, 1B tandem situation, it makes sense in theory until you factor in how much of an arm and a leg we'd have to give up to even get Saros in the first place. And you're going to give up an arm and a leg to only get 40 games out of Saros? Like, that isn't something I see this team doing whatsoever. That is not Brad Treliving's kind of decision. He is not the guy to make the splash.
So speaking of which, Treliving said this: I've got faith in Joe. Biggest question with Joe is he's gotten injured a lot. I believe in Joe as a goaltender. And that is so nice. I like Treliving. I do too. I don't like he hasn't been he's made some bad moves. Like, I don't think he's a terrible guy. He doesn't annoy the crap. I don't think anyone's ever
claimed he's a bad guy. I personally am not a massive fan of him as GM. I think there are better GM options.
Absolutely, I agree with that. But I think that's a very nice comment to make, especially because I think if Wall would have probably done anything to play in that game 7. I think that if he could have, he would have. I think he really wasn't doing great.
I totally agree with that. The one thing I think Brad Treliving bringing up Wall's injuries, it's fair in the sense that, yes, there is a pattern that he has gotten injured a lot. But I even saw, it was Sid Sixero had a segment where he's talking about what to do with the Leafs. And I agreed with a lot of what Sid Sixero said. I thought it was a very well said thing. The one part I didn't agree with is when he was talking about Joseph Wall, and he kind of said, well, Joseph Wall is just going to go out and get injured again. There's a lot you could say will continue to happen moving forward. Things like injuries, you cannot just guarantee. You can't just say, yep, just because he's gotten injured in the past means he's gotten injured in the future. And the things that kind of give me a little bit of confidence is the fact that, it's not the same injury every single time. If it was the same injury every single time, then I'd say, okay, then his shoulders are clearly a problem, or his back is clearly a problem, or whatever it is. Like, this time they did say that what they believe it was a back-related injury before game 7. which sucks. And that's terrifying. You cannot play hockey if you don't have your back full and functioning.
Sprained back, yeah.
But the fact that, it's been different injuries he suffered makes me believe, unfortunately, it is just luck. It's not a trend. It's not consistently he's injuring the same part of his body and there's something to look into there and there's a weakness or whatever. At some point, shit happens. There's luck involved. He's gotten injured. And I don't think you can make your entire assessment on what to do moving forward based on, I'm predicting Joseph Woll will get injured, meaning we need to replace him. I think that's the one thing he said in that entire segment that I totally disagreed with. I think Joseph Woll is the guy moving forward. We just need to ensure we have a great but cheap backup in the case of an injury. And again, Saros is awesome in theory, but neither of Woll or Saros should be backups. And we're giving way too much money, or not money, but giving way too much assets up to get Saros.
And we don't have the money for him. We don't have the money.
We don't have the money or the assets.
Marner would need to go bye-bye, and John Tavares would have to take a team-friendly deal. Like, that's the only, that's the only way this works.
These aren't things that are, this is I guess, our final thing we'll probably talk about before we end off the show, but what's going to happen with Marner and John Tavares. To be honest, I would be surprised if either of them are gone heading into next year. I'll say that right now. That might be a hot take. Mitch Marner has a no-move clause that is currently in order. I don't see him waiving it. I really don't. He grew up in Toronto. He's a Toronto-born guy. He clearly puts more pressure on himself than anyone else in this market. And as much as that's frustrating as a fan, part of that comes from he puts more into this crest, into wearing this crest than anyone else. He internalizes it. I grew up a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. I know what being part of Leafs Nation is. He grew up with it. And that's, as a result, I get why he puts so much pressure on himself. As much as it sucks how he sometimes changes his game in the playoffs, and it's concerning. And if he is going to finally push through and become a guy that's worthy of the $10.893 million that he makes, he is going to need a coach that shakes him up and tells him, you need to change your style. And he needs someone who's going to work with him on that. But at the end of the day, he has his family here. This is his childhood team. He wants to win a Stanley Cup here. Just got married here. We don't know family situation, but listen, he just got married. I think it's a reasonable assumption that eventually he wants to raise his kids here and stuff like that. Why would he voluntarily leave this organization? I hear the argument that it's not working from a hockey standpoint, but he's still part of an amazing team. He's an amazing player. And as much as, yes, on his next deal that expires not on this July, but next July in 2025, I would love him to take a team discount. But at the end of the day, just getting rid of him and doing the things that people always say, we should bully him into waiving that deal. Don't play him until he waives that deal. That just isn't practical.
You're also creating an enemy. You're creating an enemy with a kid who has done a lot for the city.
Exactly. And the thing is, people make comparisons of stuff in the past where it's like the owner has bullied the guy into waiving his no-move clause. You're not playing a single game until you waive that clause. Stuff like that. The difference is that I feel like people aren't talking about enough. That's in the past. We're in the social media age. You can't do stuff like that and get away with it. You're going to have constant media pressure, constant messages, constant boycotts, constant stuff like that. And you're making an enemy, not just with a player who's a Toronto-born kid that wants to win here so badly. You're making an enemy with Leafs Nation. And I know a lot of Leafs Nations want him out, but not in this fashion. Not in the fashion of bullying this kid. That is going to make a lot of enemies. It's going to make a lot of bad PR. It's going to be a PR nightmare for this Leafs organization. I don't see them having the gall, the chutzpah.
Knowing the chutzpah, exactly. The chutzpah. And seeing it from a lens of like a professional insider lens, I can tell you right now that there are, from what I've seen in the past week of working at TSN, like there's a lot of bad people out there who like to say a lot of not nice, bad things. And it takes a toll on players. It gets to a point of like death threats, threatening online, like families being threatened, friends being threatened, the rest of the team being threatened, like wives, children, like people dive into their love for this team. And that's why I love being a part of Leafs Nation, but it gets taken too far. For example, 100%. we were talking about, so I wrote, this was just kind of the start up, the entire world 3 days ago started going, what the F was Marner talking about? Why was he claiming that he was a god? Blah, blah, blah. And then Jared and I did some talking and I reflected on it. And I think the big question is, did the fans take it too far? Did the media take it too far with sort of tearing him down for this comment that at the end of the day, I think it's really that's how the city looks at the star athletes, whether they're
Yeah.
Raptors, Leafs, Jays. Like, it's true. We're
He
that
was
kind of
saying how he
city.
felt. He was expressing how he felt. It would have been totally different. And Joey, now I know you've kind of come around on your initial opinion. We talked about it, but if he had said what I feel like people are taking it as, if he had said, "I am a god in this city," that is totally different, and I would have been the first in line to bash him for that comment. But he didn't say that. He's like,
That's how I viewed it. And then I listened to it again, and Jared and I did some discussing before the pod. And now I'm just kind of like, okay, like, yeah, you know
he
what?
was
That's how
explaining.
much they're godlike to us. It's true.
He was
Like,
explaining that people put Leafs Nation on this pedestal, or not Leafs Nation. People put the Leafs, the players, on this pedestal, and it's one of those situations where it's like, if you succeed, obviously you're bowed down to, and you're treated like a god, and they will build you a statue. If he scored Game 7 overtime, Stanley Cup winning goal, something like that. I mean, please make that happen. I hope I just manifested that. But anyways, if he knows that if he were to win in this city, he would be bound down to. But with that, with
he
especially the
would be.
failure that the Leafs have had, he knows that there's another side to that where it's like either you put up or you shut up. And if you don't get the job done, this fan base will eat you alive. And I think it's absolutely valid. Who are we to say how he should talk about how he feels? He's allowed to say, I feel like I'm being, and maybe using the word God like wasn't the best way of expressing it. But what he was saying is, why are we being put on such a crazy pedestal and whatever? And listen, the bunny is why you're put on a pedestal. And I'm not saying
I
I
think
don't.
he was kind of nodding to Leafs Nation, being like, "Thank you for putting your faith in us and looking at us in this way and boosting us up." And what I think it was more of an uh like an what's the word I'm looking for? It was more of like a mission, like there's a word I'm
I,
looking for. It was more of like
like
a hats off to
like
Leafs
an
Nation.
acknowledge. I see what you're saying, like an acknowledgement. I'll say I didn't necessarily take it like that because it definitely did sound like someone that feels a lot of weight on his shoulders at the moment. Listen, if you were to be coming off of a fun golf tournament and someone were to interview, oh, what do you think about Leafs Nation? You'd be like, I love Leafs Nation. Thanks for your support. Like, he would be more like that. He is coming off of another first round playoff exit to Boston. And I took his body language and his emotions more as, there's a lot of pressure in this city. Like, I took it more like that. So, not so much like he has acknowledged Leafs Nation a lot. I do think in this one, it was a little bit of a Leafs Nation sometimes needs to reflect a little bit on how intense they are, which isn't a reasonable expectation. Like, Leafs Nations are allowed to be fans. We are fanatics. We are allowed to be crazy. But Marner's also allowed to say, that puts a lot of pressure on myself. And you know what? It is maybe possible from that lens. If he is feeling that pressure, maybe it does mean he is considering his future in Toronto. But what I think about the idea that people bring up of the Leafs adding to that already insane fan pressure by bullying the guy and being like, not only are the fans going to send you these death threats and these ridiculous messages, we're also not giving you another second of ice time until you waive your deal. You are putting yourself, even as an organization, at such a PR nightmare because not only are the fans now going to have so much more ammunition, you are going to have, as an organization, so much more backlash for treating a player like this who has given his heart and his soul and everything to try to put
You're
this team
basic.
over the edge.
You're straight up ending a relationship with a guy that's like been through it. Like he's had his fair share. I remember. Do you remember when like there was like a few injuries he had? I think there was a shitty play he made in the playoffs a few years ago. Like
In the
he's
Montreal
been
series, he shot the
he's
puck
been
above the glass. He took a puck over the glass penalty.
he's like been beaten down. I think it's just everyone needs to take it easy on the Leafs. I think
It's I'm not gonna tell. Okay, I'm gonna tell if you're doing the death threat stuff or whatever, you belong on a watch list. You're
yes,
you're you're
yes.
absolutely insane. But fans are
That's what
allowed to
I'm
be critical.
speaking to.
But fans are allowed to be critical. They're not allowed to do that. That is
Absolutely.
actual psychopath behavior. But you are absolutely allowed to be critical of a guy that, to be honest, he warrants criticism because he took that $11 million deal. He kind of made a promise to this organization that I will step up in order to put this team over the edge. And you know what? He hasn't yet. He had 4 points in the playoffs this year. if I'm not mistaken, at 4 or 3, whatever it is. You know what? It was 3. He was tied for 4th in team scoring. Ilya Labushkin had the same amount of points as him. If you are making $10.893 million, you are warranted to be held on this high standard. I'm not going to tell any fan that's giving rational criticism to take it easy. But what I am saying is, you know that not all Leafs fans are rational. There is a large percentage of actual psychopaths that are going to the guy's Instagram and going to the guy's social media and DMing him all these terribly obscene things. Now you're going to add to that, and the one organization, his manager, his coaches, his whatever, that he thought he could trust, now they're going to add to that bullying and add to that. That isn't happening. If Marner doesn't want to leave Toronto himself, he does not need to waive his no-move clause. And if the Leafs do force him to waive a no-move clause and they do any of these like bullying tactics, I have a big problem with that. And I will say that first and foremost, as a massive Leafs fan, that is something that they deserve the PR nightmare that they are asking for if they do that.
Agreed. Okay, so there's also been a lot of talk. It was more throughout the season. I wouldn't say so much anymore. I think that he has made it clear he wants to stay, but Matthews was not a big piece, but that was always something that I has been in the back of my mind. And I think it was honestly up until the Utah announcement, I was like, there he goes. He'll never be the captain. And all of a sudden, like that, the one team he probably would have left Toronto for dissolved and gone. So, like, to me, that's very telling. Like, it just, I don't know. I think he's probably bummed out about it a little bit. It'd be nice to go finish his career back home, but I don't see a reason for him leaving.
I absolutely don't. He signed a 4-year extension. To me, it doesn't, like, people said, oh, he's gone after those 4 years. I don't see it like that at all, actually. The salary cap is going up year after year. Basically, what he did is allow himself to negotiate one more deal and get one more pay bump. Because right now, what he's making, he's already the highest paid player in the league. But with Draisaitl coming up and with
Leafs history,
he wants that history. He wants to be the highest paid player in Leafs history, but also, like, he currently, once his deal kicks in, he will be the highest paid player in NHL history. But the thing is, Draisaitl's coming up after that. Then McDavid's coming up. So people will get more money than him. What he basically did is, okay, you want me to stay and be a big part of this franchise? I'm signing for 4 years. I'm going to be 31 years old when that expires. Who knows where he's at health-wise and injury-wise, whatever, because he has had some major injuries throughout his career. But all it's saying is that at 31 years old, he's giving himself the opportunity to renegotiate a deal, and I don't blame the guy for that. I would have loved him to have the 8-year deal. Nylander, of course, wanted the 8-year deal because Nylander realistically is not going to have a season like he had this year again. He's a great player. I don't see him being a 100-point player again, or just under 100 points. Austin Matthews knows he's going to continue getting better. So why not for his sake? And again, it's a lot more for his sake than the Leafs' sake. The Leafs would have loved to get him in at the same amount they signed him for 8 years. But why would the guy accept that? He knows he's going to get crazy offers every single year. He is the best player on this team, one of the best players in the league. He warranted the opportunity to renegotiate that deal. And
absolutely.
And kind of, I guess this will be like one of the final points we bring up. He has earned the seat. And not only has he earned the seat, I'm not going to say Tavares has dis-earned it, but John Tavares doesn't need the seat anymore. He's a leader. He came to this organization as the veteran guy. He came in when Marner was a second-year player and Matthews is a second-year player. I think he came in for the third year, but regardless, point remains the same. At this point, they're not kids anymore. John, they're not kids anymore. Austin Matthews is a grown-ass man. He's 25, 26 years, I think 25 years old. He has been around for the suffering. He's the best player on the team.
No, wait, did you say, you said Austin Matthews, not Tavares.
Sorry, Austin Matthews, yeah, he's 25 years old. He's not a kid anymore. He's a grown-ass man, and he has been here for the suffering. You could see it in interviews. You see it year after. He used to be a really quiet, reserved kid. He's not anymore. He is a lot more vocal. His personality has come out a lot more. He's become a lot more of a vocal leader. And John Tavares might be a lead by example guy from the sense that he does the little things right. He's more the little thing king. He wins the face-off when he needs to. He does the important things. But at some point, that isn't working. We need the vocal leader, the outgoing, energetic guy that brings the whole team together. Austin Matthews deserves the C, and if you want things to change from a mental standpoint, things like bringing in a new coach, a new voice are really important. Bringing in a new president is really important, but also bringing in a new captain is so important in my opinion. I think it's an actual, like, underratedly, it's not a necessity. I'm not going to use that word since it's not, an extreme necessity, but I think it would be a mistake if the Leafs don't give Austin Matthews the C. He didn't earn it last time because of the underpants situation. But also, he was a young kid. He did not earn the C last time when Tavares got it. Now he has shown he earned the C. Give your best player an opportunity to become the official leader.
Austin Matthews, fun fact, he makes $1.47 per minute on his current deal, I'm pretty sure.
That is crazy. That's really interesting.
Shohei Ohtani's stat of making like $100 a second was like way wilder, but like still for a hockey player, that's crazy.
It's pretty crazy. Yeah. Every single second he's sitting here, he's just like, cha-ching, cha-ching, and it adds up. And anything else we want to dive into, or do you think that
before we close off, do we think there's any other moves that the Leafs might make? I think, if anything, if Marner in some miraculous way waives the no move clause, he'll be gone. 100%, I think he'll be gone. Like, without a doubt in my mind.
If he waives a no move clause, Shanahan even said they are willing to move Matthews. The only untouchables are the guys that just signed the extensions. It's Matthews and Nylander. Everything else, or everyone else, they're willing to move on from.
I hope they lock down Bobby McMann.
Absolutely, I love Bobby McMann.
We're really big Bobby McMann supporters over here.
I think that even if we want to go back to, we're not going to get into a whole, this is opening Pandora's box. But one last minute thing that it's not an excuse, but it was a difference maker. Not having Bobby McMann there for the penalty kill and for the bottom six. These injuries do add up. Not an excuse, because the Leafs playing style could have won. They were a goal away in overtime from winning. But again, to say these things aren't a factor in the loss would be disingenuous, in my opinion.
Agreed. Well, with that, Leafs Nation, thank you for listening. And non-Leafs Nation, thank you for your patience and bearing with us through these tough and challenging times. With that being said, thank you so much for listening today. My name is Joey Rittenberg.
I'm Jared Rotenberg. We hope that throughout the offseason, we'll be able to bring you a lot more hope and optimism as things are going. But right now, we are Leafs fans. We live by the sword and we die by the sword. And as a result, right now we're frustrated. And I think you guys earned a little bit of a Leafs rant. And you guys deserve to know that you are not alone. All of Leafs Nation is feeling this right now. We're frustrated. We're pissed off. But I say this every year, and I'll say it again. The sky is still blue and white. And this run is not over.
Change is coming.
Change is coming, and that's a good thing. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. As for myself, Jared Rotenberg and Joey Rittenberg, we thank you so much for watching, and take care, guys.
Yeah.